Hey there, welcome to the channel. So today I want to take a look at natural gas in Europe and some numbers that I can't seem to really figure out here. All right, so right now we have the situation over here with the gas storage in Europe. And if we look at it for today, we can see over here that we can go to this website and they have over here the Nord Stream 1 pipeline volumes over here at zero, as Russia has shut that off. Our storage injection for September 23rd was 8.4 BCF, billion cubic feet. 5-year average is 8.3 BCF, so zero point 0.1 bearish. So what that means is that they're still injecting more than the 5-year average of what they would eject at this time. And it's hard to see, but you can see the current storage, the blue line here is now getting above the green line, which is the 5-year average. So Europe is, successfully still putting away gas in storage. So that's the situation that we're in right now. And as it starts to get colder, we're going to see how this inventory is going to hold up. Now, one of the interesting things is let's look at the U.S. situation. If we look at the this EIA, yeah, and they report this every week, and we have the lower 48 gas storage here. And when you look at that, they have this chart here. So what we have is the lower 48. So is the blue line. This is the current storage, and they update this every week. And then you have the gray. The light gray is the min max of the last 5 years and the 5-year average. Now, one of the things that you can see here is that look at this gap. So this gap here represents that we are almost. I mean, we're literally almost at the low of the 5-year average. So you can see that on the US side, in terms of the amount of storage that the US has, we're running really low. We're like at almost a 5-year low in terms of where our gas storage is for this time of the year. So comparing that, we can see that, Europe is, it's interesting too, because they are, they're not where they need to be exactly. They have a little bit more time that it will still be going up, but they're not exactly where they need to be either. So you can see here the effect of the LNG, right? So what's happening here is there's been more and more shipments of US LNG. So basically, the natural gas is going into ports into Texas and Louisiana. It's getting compressed, put on those ships, and sent over to Europe. Now, there's more information over here about LNG. And as it stands right now, US LNG exports average about 11.1 billion cubic feet per day. And so that's going to be an interesting number. I'm going to try to relate that to the Nord Stream 1 pipeline and et cetera, and try to figure out how this works. Now, here, this site's interesting that there's all these other projects coming on that should be coming on in 2024, pardon me, through 2026. You can see all these new projects that they're talking about over here. That's going to increase from where we are now at about 11 billion per day, all the way up to, almost getting to 20 billion cubic feet per day. So that's a significant increase. It's from where we're at now. It's a doubling of our current exports of LNG. Now, one thing to note here is that, so basically, if we have, and we just round here and say, okay, we have 11 BCF per day the US is exporting, and that 11 BCF is, we convert that to meters, billion cubic meters. So it's 0.31 billion cubic meters. So what we can do is we can try to relate that. So if we look at the Nord Stream 1 pipeline that has been turned off, they had 55 billion cubic meters annually going through, and that ends up being, in terms of BCF, billion cubic feet, about almost 2,000 BCF. So the point is that in terms of the US replacing Nord Stream gas, this is the amount of gas on an annual basis that needs to be replaced to replace just the Nord Stream 1. And there's many, many other pipelines as well. So we can see here that US liquefied natural gas export to Europe increased during the first 4 months. Now, what's interesting here, if you look at this chart, you'd see all of 2020, one in 2022, the US is exporting about 10. We're getting up there to 12. But what's happening is the characteristic is changing. It's not that we're exporting that much more. Yeah, sure. It has gone up a little bit from like 10 and under 10 in some months to getting closer to 12, but it's the mix. So what's happening here, the US is basically, we're cutting off Asia to send that supply to Europe. And that's, an interesting thing to kind of note here. Now, one other thing is I want to put this back into the spreadsheet and try to figure out, like, does this make sense? If I just take the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, 55 billion cubic meters annual that could go through that, can the US and other countries as well replace that? Can they replace that with LNG? Now, before we do that one thing, there's something important that we need to understand is that if when you drill a well, right, you drill a well, even oil wells, there's natural gas, there's different layers down there. If it was an oil well, you have oil, you also have natural gas, and you might have other distillates in there. You have this thing called casing gas, which is almost pure gasoline, very valuable stuff. Funny, had a well, and that stuff, we'd get like 4 barrels of that a day. And that stuff, we would get like a $5 per barrel premium for it because it very little refining necessary for that stuff. So you get a whole mixture of stuff. And one of the problems that we still have in the US is we're still actually, if you don't have the infrastructure to get the natural gas out, right, and get it into a pipeline, you really don't have much choice, right? You're going to flare it. And there's still a lot of flaring in the US right now. So we're actually burning a lot of that natural gas off. But the point going back to LNG is that you have to go through a process, right? Natural gas comes out, very little you need to do with it. What they're going to do is they're going to put that hydrogen sulfide in there so that you can smell it because it's odorless, whatever. So they're going to add that, some minimal processing, et cetera. It can go right into storage. It can go right into the gas distribution network, right? So very little cost. LNG is a very different process. LNG is like, okay, you have to take this gas, okay, you have to cool it and compress it, basically turning it into a liquid, like it's like minus 100 C or something like that. You can look it up. But the point is you have to go through all that process to basically liquefy it, put it on a ship, ship it, keep it in that condition, ship it to your destination, and then reliquefy it. You not reliquefy, unliquefy it. You have to turn it back into a gas so it can be distributed through the network. So you have to understand that LNG is expensive. So even if the US can replace it, and US, and also, of course, the UAE, there's other, the Middle East as well. Even if you can replace it, right, this is much more expensive stuff, right? This is, there's estimates of like it's 5 times more expensive. And so that's another factor to keep in mind. But I want to try to go and address the numbers that I don't understand. So this is one of these things where, hey, I don't know everything for sure, of course, but I'm trying to understand this. I'm trying to like figure out like how bad is this situation potentially going to get in the winter? I mean, is it possible that the U.S. and Middle East can actually replace that Russian natural gas at a high cost, but still replace it? Well, let's try to look at a couple numbers here. There's a couple things to note. First of all, cumulative operational capacity of LNG. So this is where I wonder if this number is wrong, but basically it's in million cubic meters. So at this point, we're at like, call it 104 million cubic meters. Now that's the total capacity of the vessels, right? So if you have all these vessels have different amounts of storage, actually in 100,000 meters, not millions of meters each ship has, and you have 700 ships around the world, et cetera, the capacity is that. And so now we need to figure out like what would it cost to replace that. So let's go look at the spreadsheet. So we go over here to our spreadsheet, and we can see that here's the Nord Stream 1, 55 billion cubic meters. We have, you can look up and you see there's about 700 vessels. Now, this is increasing, and I think by 2024, 2026, something like that, they're adding another 100 vessels. So that's good, and I'm sure the capacity is going to be larger. Right now, the capacity is 150,000 meters, not million meters, not billion meters. It's 150,000 meters per ship. So if we go to our old data, we say, well, how many shipments per year to replace Nord Stream 2? And we look at that, we just say, hey, look, it's a very simple thing. It's like, yeah, 55 billion per year. capacity is 150,000. That's the average. There are larger ships that are twice the size, but you have smaller ships as well. And I assume that the newer ships are coming out much larger capacity, so that is going to work in benefit of this. But the point is, this is how many shipments that you need. Just taking this as reference, you need 400, almost 400,000 shipments. So how many shipments per year per ship? We'll take that and divide it by the number of ships. So you can see the equation there. So look here, you got your blue divided by your green, right? And you see that you get 524 shipments per ship per year. So this makes no sense, right? You're talking about you have to load a ship, get it to the destination, deliver it, get it back to the source, and do this again. A more realistic is that maybe you can get one a week, and so you'd say 52. So you look at this and you say you're short 471 ships. Now, this gets into let's go to some of the newer numbers here. And I don't want to look at that. I want to look at this data here. Okay, so this is the one I want to look at. So when we go to that website, we got this information that we're exporting 11.1 billion cubic feet per day, and this is our U.S. LNG total export. And I'm just going to assume it's all going to Europe, but that's not the case. A bunch is going to Asia as well, right? So we to go ahead and we saw our conversion factor that we had from that website. We convert that into billion cubic meters per day. When we do that conversion, so it's a cubic meter is a much larger volume, so it's multiplied by a fraction. So this is 0.31 billion cubic meters per day. And then even we're just going to be optimistic, assume 365 days a year that we're doing that. Then the US could export 114 billion cubic meters per year. Now, going back to what we had is the Nord Stream is at 55 BCM. The answer is, if you just look at this here, you look at it and say, well, yeah, the US could replace that, right? I mean, there's a shot, right? There's a reasonable shot that, like, look, if we're doing it at this rate, then we're going to more than double the amount that was coming in from that one pipeline. But then some of the numbers don't add up. So now, if I look at the 11 BCF, I'm saying, well, how many ships would it take to do that? So now if I go and look at our taker capacity, it's 104 million cubic meters in total. That's the capacity of all the ships. So we convert that to BCM, you got to divide by 1,000, right? And you're at 0.14. Now, number of shipments in the entire fleet. So if you view it as an armada, you have 0.104 billion cubic meters and all the 700 ships all together, they can carry that. And let's assume they all go from one port to another. How many times do they have to do that? Well, you simply divide that into the BCM per year, and suddenly you're at a huge number of 1,100 shipments of the entire fleet. And so this is where the numbers don't make sense, right? There's no way, there's not enough ship capacity to deliver this 11 BCF per day. So the point is that I don't know what's going on. Something's wrong with the numbers somewhere. Either the capacity of the shipment, the fleet of LNG tankers is much larger than this, or there's a conversion factor or something like that going on, which it could be as well. Because these are numbers, I would take the 11.1 BCF per day as a real number, right? And so because just looking where the data, EIA data, it's probably a pretty accurate number. So based on that, you have this issue where it's possible that the US can replace it. And I don't understand completely how we get there in terms of there must be something wrong with the ships or the capacity per ships or a conversion error somewhere that's causing this to be an issue. So that's where we are. So if you have any idea out there, like what's going wrong with these numbers, just please leave a comment below, because I'm kind of curious. So now let's go to the point of all this. The point is that we're trying to figure out certain things here. We're trying to figure out if, how bad it could get this winter. So let's take a look at that. So if we do a search, now this is anecdotal, understand this. But if we look and we can see, we're trying to get this understanding. You can see all these stories about companies, industry in Europe and Germany and other parts of Europe that are cutting back. And this is already happening right now. And, you see the headlines, BASF could cut output further amid fragile gas supply. So these companies are already cutting back. We have two factors at play. We have both the supply of gas, industry uses a huge amount of natural gas. And so we have, this is where the pressure, like if you're looking at this and saying, well, how did Europe get to a point where they're able to put this much natural gas in storage? Well, the reason is because they're forcing their companies to cut back. And that's apparently what's going on here. And so the companies are having to cut back. Now, this is going to cause a lot of economic damage. You're talking about a situation where, if you work for these big companies, BASF, whatever, and they taking the cut back your hours, they cut back production, they're going to lay people off. They have no choice. They're going to have to lay people off, and they're going to have to close things down. And so all this is happening as we are right now. Now, going into winter, this situation is only going to get worse. This is from CNBC. Supplies Norwich reduced to 20%. Well, this is 0%. So this is a little older thing here, but they've cut supplies to 0%. So this is an old chart here. So this is one big issue here. The pricing is soaring. So in Europe, the European gas prices have gone through the roof. And so that means it's just a huge issue. And what this is going to do is you can see that the expectation is that you're going to have negative GDP. This is going to really impact GDP. Very simple. If companies are closing down, et cetera, it's going to be a problem. Now, what's interesting when you look at the UNG gas chart, and so this is kind of the US price of natural gas, you can see that it's been going through the roof. I mean, it's come off a lot from 34 to 24, so that's a big decline. But in the big picture, it's still been going up a lot. And you can see the reason why. So basically, they're sucking. So what would I think about pricing of natural gas in the US, right? Let's go ahead and try to figure that one out. Well, if given that you have all these companies that are going to basically double our LNG export in the next few years, that very simply is going to put demand on our natural gas in the US. And you can see already that we're actually at the low end of the 5-year range on natural gas storage. So therefore, the supply is down. It's very far down, hence the price is up. So we can see that the price is up. Now, we have these big swings, very volatile. That's definitely to be expected. But you can see that compared to where we were back in 2021, where you're talking about $10 here, you're well above 20, even with the correction. So you were a 2x to 3x increase in US prices. And this is not financial advice, but my expectation would be is that's going to continue, because at the same time, we have all these other projects coming on board. And with the demand for the LNG right now, I would expect that also shipbuilding, they're bringing on more ships, they're doing all this stuff. I mean, you're not going to sit there and increase your LNG capacity without the ships to move it. So all this is being planned out. And the reason being that they assume that the demand is going to be there in the long term. So that's my conclusion for LNG. I think that we still have a big issue, because the final thing is, as we talked about, this is now very expensive natural gas. This is a 2x, 3x, 5x increase in cost of natural gas. And therefore, the entire European economy has to adjust to that. Going to the US and thinking to what are the problems that we have right now, and also across much of the world, is we have what is one of the problems. The problems is inflation. I mean, we have a Fed that, keeps just pumping up interest rates 75 basis points per meeting. Because why? Because we have this high inflation, and they're just like, look, we want to kill this inflation off. If you're looking at a situation in Europe where they also have high inflation, and you're baking into the cake, understand what's really happening here. You're baking in inflation, because what you're doing is you're saying, hey, right now, Europe, you're going to take cheap natural gas from Nord Stream 1, and you're going to replace it with very expensive natural gas coming from the US, coming from the Middle East, that has to go through this whole liquefaction process, turning into LNG and back. You're talking about baking in inflation over the next 2 to 3 years. So this is another problem that's going to be a very difficult problem for Europe to deal with. So in conclusion, this is really what's coming. So even though it looks like you can look at numbers and say that there's a possibility that we could replace a decent amount of that with LNG, I still maintain that it's going to take a long time for all these projects to come online and to actually replace all that. It's just going to take a long time. You need the infrastructure to do it. And even when you do all that, which remember, you're building new infrastructure that you have to pay off and it's not fully depreciated. So what that means is, you're going to have big charges for depreciation. You're going to have a high cost. It's very high cost gas. And the entire European economy is going to have to adjust to this. So I think we also had the issue with the gas prices, and they tried to cap them in the UK, but still, they cap at 2,500 when the average was 1,000. And that doesn't include capping for businesses, small businesses. They're supposedly going to get something, but they're probably not going to get it. So we have a catastrophe coming, and LNG really isn't the answer to the problem, but that's the direction that the world appears to be going. So that's it for this one. Bye.